My mother didn't return after the night shift, sir. Rachel's words dropped like a bomb in the still, cold air of the billionaire's office. The statement hung there, heavy, as Nathaniel Pierce stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. His eyes narrowed, his posture stiffened, his usual air of control slipping for just a moment. "What do you mean, Rachel?" he asked, his voice edged with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Rachel didn't flinch. She stood in front of him, her expression calm but unreadable. She was always composed, but today, there was something different. Something beneath the surface that Nathaniel hadn't noticed before. "She didn't come back," Rachel repeated, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside. Nathaniel looked at her, trying to understand. The words didn't fit into his world of efficiency and order. "Your mother, she's missing?" he asked, though the question felt insufficient. Rachel nodded slightly, her face betraying no emotion as she spoke. "She was supposed to return after the night shift, but she didn't. I haven't heard from her since." Nathaniel took a step back, trying to process the weight of the situation. Missing, a life lost, and Rachel was standing here, her whole world shaken, while he was left fumbling for the right response. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something stir inside him. Something that wasn't about power, control, or status, but about humanity. "I didn't know," Nathaniel said quietly, almost to himself. "I never knew." The realization hit him hard, harder than he would have liked to admit. In all his years of success, of controlling everything around him, he had never thought to look beyond his own bubble. The people who worked for him were just that. People who worked for him. They came and went and he barely noticed. But Rachel was different. She had always been in the background, but now, standing before him, she wasn't just a maid or an employee. She was someone with a life, with a family, and with struggles of her own. He saw her differently in that moment, not as the woman who cleaned his office, but as a human being, grieving, uncertain, alone. "I'm sorry," he said, the words foreign on his tongue, not out of pity, but because, for once, he felt like he should say them. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The air between them shifted in a way Nathaniel couldn't explain. She wasn't asking for his help. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She had her own strength, her own dignity, and that realization cut through him. Rachel wasn't someone who waited for a handout. She was someone who had carried the weight of her world alone for far too long. Nathaniel stood there, caught in the quiet aftermath of her words, his mind still racing, trying to figure out how he fit into this moment, or if he even belonged in it. Jonathan stood there, staring at Rachel as her words lingered in the air. The usual sharpness in his eyes was gone, replaced with confusion and an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the situation, something about it not making sense. He had been so consumed by his own world of luxury, business, and control that it took hearing those words from her, the black maid standing in front of him, to snap him out of his detached existence. He had always seen the people around him as tools for his success, his employees, and yet now, in the quiet of this moment, he saw her differently, more human than ever before. He cleared his throat, but the words that followed were far softer than he expected. "How long has it been since you last heard from her?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual authority. Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she seemed to take a moment, gathering herself, the silence stretching between them like a heavy blanket. 2 days, she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with something he hadn't expected to hear from her. A hint of fear, of uncertainty. It hit him then, the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just talking about someone she knew, someone distant. She was talking about her mother, the one person in her life who had always been there for her. Jonathan's gaze shifted, something like empathy starting to settle in his chest. A strange and unsettling sensation. He had never considered this side of his employees' lives, the struggles they faced outside of the work they did for him. "And no one has heard anything from her at all?" he pressed, his mind still trying to catch up, still working in that mode of problem-solving that had served him so well in The past. I called everyone I could think of. I went to the police, but Rachel's voice trailed off, and Jonathan could hear the pain in the silence that followed. There was no doubt in his mind now. She wasn't just seeking his help, she was desperate. In that moment, he realized just how much he had taken his own life for granted. His wealth, his power, the control he had over everything, had all insulated him from the harsh realities others lived with. Rachel, who had always been so composed, so capable, was now standing before him, vulnerable in a way he'd never imagined. The realization hit him harder than any business deal ever had. I can't imagine what you're going through, he said, the words sounding inadequate even as they left his lips. She looked at him then, a faint trace of something like disbelief in her eyes. You can't, she said, her voice not cold, but real, as if she had already accepted that no one, not even Nathaniel Pierce, could truly understand. But I can help, he found himself saying before he even fully understood what he meant. It wasn't about money or business. He wasn't offering a solution, he was offering something else. She met his eyes, searching his expression for any sign that he meant it. She didn't ask for anything, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something soft, something she wasn't used to showing. She nodded slowly, the smallest of movements, and for a brief moment, the weight of the world between them seemed just a little lighter. Jonathan wasn't sure what it meant, or what would come of this offer. But in that moment, he understood something about the world beyond his office, beyond his wealth, that he had never fully grasped before. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the one in control. The next day, Nathaniel found himself standing at the entrance of the police station. The cold, overcast sky above casting a dull light on the city around him. He had never thought he would be here, never thought he would find himself standing in a place so far removed from the world he had built. His tailored suit, perfect and polished, seemed out of place against the plain, utilitarian surroundings. The quiet hum of the station, the distant murmurs of officers, in their conversations only added to the weight of the situation. He glanced at his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from his assistant reminding him of a meeting, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered right now except what Rachel had said. My mother didn't return after the night shift. The words echoed in his mind, louder now, impossible to ignore. Rachel's quiet desperation, the way she had stood in front of him with such steady eyes, holding in a pain he had no idea how to fix. It all felt surreal. Nathaniel stepped forward, the familiar rush of control and purpose that usually guided him now absent. For once, he was stepping into a world he had no map for. Inside the station, he approached the front desk, where a young officer looked up from his paperwork. The officer's expression didn't change as he greeted Nathaniel, but there was a certain familiarity in the way he addressed him that made Nathaniel feel a twinge of discomfort. How can I help you? The officer asked, his tone polite but neutral. I'm here about a missing person, Nathaniel said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the strange knot of uncertainty in his chest. The officer nodded, gesturing for him to follow as he moved to the back of the station. As they walked down the narrow hallway, Nathaniel couldn't help but think about how this was the opposite of everything he was used to. He was used to being in control, making decisions that shaped the world around him. But here, in this space, with Rachel's mother's disappearance weighing heavily on his mind, he felt powerless, lost even. The officer led him to a small room where a detective was already waiting, papers scattered on the desk in front of him. Nathaniel introduced himself, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, the detective wasted no time. You're here about Rachel Blackwell's mother? He asked, glancing up from the file. Yes, Nathaniel replied, his voice firm, but his eyes betrayed the growing unease. What can you tell me? The detective sighed, rubbing his temples as he explained the details of the situation, but Nathaniel wasn't really listening. His mind was focused on Rachel's face, her expression when she had told him her mother was missing. It haunted him, that look of quiet strength mixed with vulnerability. She had trusted him with this, and despite everything he had built, despite all his power, he had no idea how to help her. We're doing everything we can, the detective said, breaking through Nathaniel's thoughts. But we need more information from her, too. Anything that could point us in the right direction. Nathaniel nodded slowly, feeling a surge of responsibility that he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just the man who could write a check or make a phone call to fix problems anymore. This wasn't something that could be solved with money. This was about something far more fragile: human connection, trust, and a woman's search for answers to a loss he had no real understanding of. As he left the station, Nathaniel's steps were slower, the weight of the world pressing down on him in a way he wasn't used to. He had always believed that money and power were enough to solve anything. But now, standing on the sidewalk, with the sounds of the city fading in the distance, he realized he couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix Rachel's pain, her loss. But he had to try. He had to find a way to make it right. Not because he owed her, but because for the first time, he understood that it was his humanity, not his wealth, that mattered most. The next day, Nathaniel found himself back at the office. But the usual hum of productivity that surrounded him felt distant, almost muted. The weight of the conversation with Rachel lingered in his mind, and he couldn't shake the image of her, standing in front of him with quiet strength, her mother's absence hanging between them like an unspoken truth. His hands hovered over the desk, papers scattered in front of him, yet his thoughts were miles away. He had always believed that the world could be bent to his will, that money and influence could solve anything. But now, standing in his sleek, modern office, he realized that the most important thing in this moment was something he couldn't control. He couldn't fix Rachel's broken world, and he couldn't bring her mother back. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. "Mr. Pierce, the police are on the line," his assistant called out, her voice breaking through the stillness. Nathaniel straightened, his professional mask slipping back into place. "Thank you, send them in," he replied, his voice steady but not entirely his. The door opened, and a police detective stepped in, his demeanor calm but with a hint of concern in his eyes. Nathaniel motioned for him to take a seat, his mind still heavy with the conversation he had had the previous evening. The detective sat down, flipping through a folder of papers, before looking up at Nathaniel. "Mr. Pierce, we've looked into Rachel Blackwell's mother. The situation is more complicated than we initially thought," the detective began. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken, but he maintained his composure. "Complicated how?" he asked, his voice more controlled than he felt. The detective sighed, his fingers tapping against the file. "It seems that Rachel's mother may have been involved in something more than just a night shift at the diner. We found some records that suggest there were issues she may have been facing, ones that were kept hidden from her family and co-workers. We're still trying to piece it all together." Nathaniel listened, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of what the detective was saying. He had never known the Maid's family situation in detail, never thought to ask. He had always seen Rachel as part of the background, as someone who just did her job and did it well. The idea that there was a deeper layer to her life, something he had never even considered, stirred something inside him. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe something more unsettling. "What do you need from me?" Nathaniel asked, his tone no longer just businesslike but tinged with a sense of urgency. The detective glanced at him, considering his words carefully before speaking. "We need to know if there's anything she might have mentioned to you, any unusual behavior, anything at all that could help us understand why her mother might have disappeared." Nathaniel paused, his mind flashing back to the conversation with Rachel. He remembered how she had looked at him, her eyes full of something he hadn't fully understood at the time. Pain, yes, but also strength. She hadn't asked him for anything, not directly, but she had trusted him with a piece of her life that she had kept hidden for so long. Nathaniel sat back in his chair, running his fingers through his hair as he tried to gather his thoughts. "She didn't tell me much," he admitted. "But she did mention her mother, said she was going through something. I didn't press her on it, and to be honest, I didn't think it was my place." The detective nodded, as if he had expected that answer, before standing up. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. We'll continue looking into it." Nathaniel watched the detective leave, his mind still spinning. He had always been able to fix problems, to control situations, but this was different. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control here. He couldn't fix this. Rachel had been right in front of him, struggling with something he hadn't even seen. He had given her the apartment, the money, the things, but he had never given her the one thing she truly needed: understanding. Nathaniel looked out the window, his mind racing as the city bustled below him. He had to do something. But what? Rachel had trusted him with her pain, but now, he had to figure out how to help her without simply throwing money at the situation. It wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not after everything she had trusted him with. The next few days were a blur for Nathaniel. He found himself consumed by the search for Rachel's mother, but every lead felt like a dead end. He couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, something he wasn't seeing. Rachel had been right in front of him all this time, but he had never really seen her. She had trusted him with her life, but he had never truly understood the weight of what she was carrying. The guilt gnawed at him, but it was more than that. He couldn't get the image of her calm face, her steady eyes, out of his head. She wasn't just the maid. She was someone who had been silently bearing burdens that he had never imagined. It was early in the morning when he found himself back at the diner where Rachel's mother worked. The place was quiet, the air thick with the smell of coffee and greasy breakfast foods. Nathaniel sat at a booth, his fingers tapping against the cup in front of him, waiting. He had asked around, but no one had seen anything out of the ordinary the night Rachel's mother went missing. He knew he had to get answers not just for Rachel, but for himself. A waitress approached, her tired eyes meeting his. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. Nathaniel hesitated, unsure of how to start. He had never been good at asking the right questions. "I'm looking for someone," he said finally, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "Her name's Anna Blackwell. She worked here, she—" The waitress nodded, her face falling as if she had heard this all before. "She was a good worker, but she didn't show up that night." Her voice softened. "I didn't think anything was wrong at first. Anna's a tough woman. But then, no one heard from her. We tried calling her. But," she trailed off, shaking her head, "we just didn't think she'd disappear like that." Nathaniel's mind raced. There was something in her tone, something in her hesitation, that made him think there was more to this story than anyone was letting on. "Did she mention anything? Anyone who might have been trouble for her?" he asked, leaning forward. The waitress hesitated for a moment before speaking. "She had a couple of guys bothering her. Not the type you'd think. Quiet, kept to themselves. But there was one. He'd come around sometimes. Wouldn't say much, but I could tell he made her nervous." Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know who he was?" he pressed, his voice sharp now. The waitress shook her head. "No, she never said. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it." Nathaniel sat back, his mind spinning. Anna Blackwell had been trying to protect Rachel, protect herself, and now she was gone. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle wasn't complete. He needed to find out who this man was, and why he had made Anna so afraid. As he stood to leave, Nathaniel's thoughts turned to Rachel. He hadn't seen her since the police had started their investigation. She had been distant, almost like she didn't want his help. He understood why, but now, he knew he had to do more than just provide money or answers. He had to show her that he could be the one to help her, that he could be the one to stand by her in a way he never had before. Nathaniel stepped out into the cold morning air, the weight of the world still pressing on his shoulders, but now with a new determination. He wasn't going to let this go. Not for Rachel, not for Anna, and not for himself. The following day, Nathaniel found himself standing in front of a small, modest house on the outskirts of town. He had never been to this part of the city before. This was a place far removed from his usual world of sleek offices and expensive cars. The contrast was jarring. The house in front of him was simple, almost humble, and for the first time in a long while, Nathaniel felt like an outsider, a visitor to a world he had never truly seen. He knocked on the door, his fingers tapping nervously against his palm, an unusual feeling for a man who had built his life around control. The door opened slowly, revealing an older woman, her face etched with lines that told stories of hardship and resilience. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but wary. Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, then introduced himself, his words more awkward than usual. "I'm Nathaniel Pierce," he said. "I'm looking for Rachel Blackwell's mother." The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "What do you want with her?" she asked, her tone defensive. Nathaniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm trying to find out what happened to her. It's important." The woman's face softened slightly, though there was still a trace of suspicion in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. Nathaniel didn't know how to answer. He couldn't explain it, not entirely. He just knew that Rachel had trusted him with something important, and now, for the first time, he felt a sense of responsibility he had never known before. "I just need to understand," he said, his voice quieter now. The woman studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether to let him in. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The interior of the house was small but filled with warmth. There were photos on the walls, pictures of Rachel, her mother, and a family that seemed close-knit despite their struggles. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal spaces that Nathaniel was accustomed to. He took a seat on the couch, the weight of the situation settling over him as he waited for the woman to speak. She sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Rachel's mother was a good woman," she said, her voice quiet. "She didn't deserve what happened to her." Nathaniel leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What happened to her?" he asked. The woman's eyes darkened. "She got caught up in something she couldn't escape. People don't always understand what people like her go through," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. Nathaniel felt a pang of guilt. He had never thought about it that way before. He had always seen Rachel as an employee, someone who did her job well, but now he realized he had missed the most important part of her story. "Do you think she's in trouble?" Nathaniel asked, his tone more urgent now. The woman nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "I think she got mixed up with people who didn't care about her," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "And now, I fear she's gone." Nathaniel's heart sank. He had come here to find answers, but now, with each word, it seemed as though the answers were slipping further away. "Is there anyone who can help?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I wish I could say yes," she said softly, "but I don't know who else can help. Rachel is going to have to face this on her own, just like her mother did." Nathaniel sat back, his mind spinning. For the first time, he realized that he was standing on the edge of something much bigger than he had ever anticipated. This wasn't just about finding Rachel's mother. It was about understanding a world he had never truly seen, a world where people like Rachel fought battles that he couldn't begin to comprehend. The realization was unsettling, but in that moment, it was also awakening. Nathaniel Pierce wasn't just looking for a missing person. He was beginning to understand that the most important thing he could do was to help Rachel navigate the life she had been forced to live. And for the first time, he was willing to try. Days passed, and Nathaniel found himself more and more consumed by the mystery surrounding Rachel's mother. He had spent countless hours going through every lead, contacting various people, but it seemed that every answer he received only led to more questions. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how little he truly knew about Rachel, about her life beyond the work she did for him. She had been an enigma, always so composed, so professional. But now, as he searched for the truth behind her mother's disappearance, Nathaniel saw a side of her life that he had never bothered to understand. The walls of his luxurious office seemed to close in around him as he sat there, staring at the file in front of him. It was filled with vague leads and incomplete information, each piece of the puzzle slipping further out of his reach. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting as he thought back to his earlier conversation with Rachel. He had promised her that he would help, but the more he tried to make things right, the more helpless he felt. His phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was the detective. "Mr. Pierce?" the detective began, his tone as businesslike as ever. We've made some progress in the investigation, but there's still a lot we don't know. Nathaniel sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. What progress? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The detective paused for a moment before speaking again. We found out that Rachel's mother, Anna, had been involved with some people who might be connected to the disappearance. We're still piecing things together, but it looks like she was trying to get out of a situation, something she didn't want anyone to know about. Nathaniel felt his heart drop. The thought of Rachel's mother, a woman he had never met, being involved in something so dangerous, was overwhelming. He couldn't shake the image of Rachel standing in front of him, her eyes so full of pain, yet so composed. Do you think she was in danger? Nathaniel asked, his voice tight. It's too soon to say for sure, the detective replied. But it's clear that Anna was trying to protect her daughter from whatever was going on. She didn't want Rachel to know. Nathaniel's thoughts raced. He had to find a way to help, but he didn't know where to start. He didn't know anything about Rachel's life, her struggles, her family. It was like he had been living in a bubble, completely unaware of the world outside his own. As the conversation ended, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb the new information. It was like a fog had lifted, but the more he saw, the more complicated everything became. He needed to talk to Rachel. He needed to understand everything she had been hiding. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, but as it rang, he hesitated. What could he say to her? What if she didn't want his help? What if she had already figured it out on her own? But there was no time for second-guessing. He had to try. The phone clicked, and Rachel's voice came through the line, steady but guarded. Mr. Pierce, she said, as if she were speaking to a stranger, as if the walls she had built around herself were too high to climb. Nathaniel's heart sank. Rachel, he said, his voice softer than usual. I need to talk to you. About everything. There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment Nathaniel thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what you can do, she said, the words filled with quiet pain. But if you really want to help, you need to understand what's going on. Nathaniel nodded to himself. Even though she couldn't see him, this was it. He had no idea what he was getting into, but for the first time in his life, he knew that he had to find out. He had to understand her world, not as her employer, but as someone who cared. I'm listening, he said, his voice steady now, resolved. Tell me everything. The call ended with a click, and Nathaniel sat there, the weight of the world settling in around him. He had taken the first step, but what came next was unknown. One thing was certain, he was no longer the man in control. Rachel had already begun to teach him what it meant to truly listen, and for the first time, Nathaniel realized that listening was the hardest thing of all. The days that followed were a blur for Nathaniel. He spent his time piecing together the fragments of Rachel's life, learning things about her he had never bothered to understand before. Every conversation, every meeting felt different now. The usual rush of his busy schedule had slowed to a crawl as he found himself constantly thinking about Rachel, her mother, and the struggle they were facing. Nathaniel's life had always been defined by control, power, and the constant need to dominate every aspect of his existence. But now, standing in the middle of a situation where none of those things mattered, he was beginning to see the world in a way he never had before. Rachel's voice echoed in his mind, and it haunted him. You need to understand what's going on. Those words rang true now more than ever. Nathaniel had never taken the time to truly understand the people around him. He had hired Rachel because she was capable, but he had never considered her as a person outside of her role. And now, as he dug deeper into her life, he realized just how little he had known. He was standing at the edge of a truth that had been right in front of him all along. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. I'm meeting with someone who might know something about my mom. I'll keep you posted. He read the message twice, his heart racing. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He wasn't just offering help. He was becoming a part of the story. He was stepping into her world, the world that had always been hidden from him, and he wasn't sure what to expect. But one thing was certain. He couldn't back away now. He had made a promise to Rachel, and he intended to keep it. The next day, Nathaniel drove to the address Rachel had given him. The area was unfamiliar, filled with older buildings and quieter streets. He parked his car on the side of the road and walked to the small coffee shop where she had arranged to meet someone. As he entered, he spotted Rachel at a table in the corner, sitting with a man who appeared to be in his early 40s. Rachel looked up as he approached, her face composed, but Nathaniel could see the strain in her eyes. She had been through so much, and he had barely begun to understand the depth of her pain. The man stood as Nathaniel reached the table. "Mr. Pierce?" he asked, extending his hand. Nathaniel nodded, shaking his hand. "I'm Steve," the man said, taking a seat again. "I know what you're looking for." Rachel's gaze flicked between them, and Nathaniel could tell she was nervous, but she didn't let it show. Steve looked at Nathaniel, his expression serious. "I know Anna. She came to me a few weeks ago. She was in trouble and she wanted out. But whatever it was, it got her mixed up with the wrong people." Nathaniel leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What kind of trouble?" Steve hesitated for a moment, glancing at Rachel before speaking. "She didn't say much, but I can tell she was trying to protect someone." "Rachel, I'm guessing," he said, looking at Rachel. She nodded, her eyes meeting his for the first time during the conversation. "Yes," she said softly. "She was trying to protect me." Nathaniel's heart sank as he processed Steve's words. This wasn't just about Rachel's mother. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The pieces were starting to come together, but they still didn't make sense. Nathaniel felt a surge of guilt. How had he missed all of this? How had he not seen the struggles Rachel had faced? But now, he knew he had to do more than just listen. He had to act. He had to help, not just with his money or influence, but with his understanding. Rachel had trusted him with her pain, and it was time he did more than just offer his wealth. He had to offer something real. The conversation continued, but Nathaniel's mind was already racing ahead. There was still so much to uncover, but for the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of this journey, not just a spectator. The walls around him were coming down, piece by piece, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. But he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't walk away now. Nathaniel sat in his car, parked across from the small apartment building where Rachel lived. The weight of the past few days hung heavily on him, but now he felt a sense of urgency, something he hadn't felt before. He wasn't sure what had changed, but it was clear that he could no longer look at Rachel as just an employee. She had shown him a world he had never known, a world beyond his wealth and power, one filled with pain, sacrifice, and courage. He wasn't sure how he had become so deeply involved in her life, but he knew he had to be there for her now, not just as a billionaire, but as a person who truly cared. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the building, his steps slow, almost hesitant. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew that the time for distance was over. He had to face what was happening, face the reality of the situation, and most importantly, face Rachel. As he walked up the stairs to her apartment, his heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea how she would react to his presence, or if she even wanted to see him. The last time they spoke, she had been distant, as if she was guarding something she hadn't yet revealed. He knocked softly on the door, and after a few moments, it opened. Rachel stood there, her eyes tired, but her posture still strong. She didn't look surprised to see him, but there was a guarded look in her eyes, one that Nathaniel had come to recognize as her way of keeping her emotions in check. "Mr. Pierce," she said quietly, her voice neutral. "Rachel," he replied, his voice gentler than usual. "I know I'm not the person you want to see right now, but I need to talk to you about everything." She didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, as if weighing whether or not to let him in. Finally, she stepped aside, opening the door fully. "Come in," she said, her voice softening just a bit. Nathaniel entered the apartment, his eyes scanning the modest space. It was small but cozy, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal spaces he was used to. He felt like a stranger in this place, a world that was so far removed from his own. Rachel led him to the couch, where they both sat down, the silence stretching between them. Nathaniel didn't know how to start. There was so much he needed to say, so much he had to explain, but the words felt inadequate. "I know I've failed you," he said finally, his voice low, filled with regret. "I've been so focused on my own world. I never saw what you were going through. I never saw you." Rachel looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Nathaniel thought she might say something harsh, something that would drive him away, but instead, she simply nodded. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "You didn't know." Nathaniel felt a pang in his chest. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and he realized just how much he had underestimated her. Rachel wasn't just the maid, the woman who worked for him. She was a person, a strong, resilient woman who had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and he had never once truly seen her. "But I want to help," Nathaniel said, his voice firm now, determined. "I don't know what's going to happen with your mother, but I want to make things right. I want to be there for you, not as your boss, but as someone who cares about you." Rachel's eyes softened, but she didn't speak immediately. For a long moment, she just stared at him, as if searching for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do this. I didn't ask for your help." Nathaniel's heart sank, but he shook his head. "I know you didn't, but I'm offering it anyway. Because you're not alone in this, Rachel." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything they had both been through. Nathaniel wasn't sure what would happen next. He didn't know if Rachel would accept his help, or if she would push him away. But in that moment, he understood something he had never understood before. Help wasn't about power or money. It was about being there for someone, truly being there, without expecting anything in return. And for the first time, Nathaniel Pierce realized that he was willing to do just that.